The great silver towers of the Galactic Unified Military Academy shone under the light of two suns. This was a place for the best warriors in the galaxy. It trained them to be leaders and heroes. Species from 1,000 worlds came here. There were the Grown, big and strong from a heavy gravity planet. Their muscles were like thick ropes and their voices were deep rumbles. There were the Tisal, quick and nervous, their large black eyes seeing everything at once. And there were the Signians, who thought in numbers and logic, their movements precise and exact. In a large circular classroom, Instructor Kalar looked over his new students. Kalar was a Valerian. His body was covered in fine green scales that shimmered when he moved. He had 4 arms and 2 large dark eyes that could look in different directions at once. He was a famous commander and he knew how to spot a great warrior. He looked at the Gran cadets already boasting about their strength. He saw the Tisal, their fingers tapping, ready to move. He saw the Signians, their data pads already full of notes, and then he saw the 2 humans. They sat together near the back. The young man was named Jin. He had black hair and calm dark eyes. He watched everything, but his face showed no emotion. The young woman was named Mina. She was slightly smaller, with a quiet face that seemed very focused. While other cadets shifted in their seats or whispered, the 2 humans were perfectly still. They did not speak to each other. They did not try to get anyone's attention. Kalar began the lesson. It was about basic battle formations. Who can tell me the primary weakness of the phalanx formation when used in an urban environment? Kalar's voice clicked and buzzed as Valerian voices did. A Gran cadet named Borv slammed a heavy fist on his desk. It is too slow. The strong must lead from the front, not hide behind shields. The other Gran grunted in agreement. A Tisal cadet chirped in, her voice fast. No, the weakness is the exposed flanks. Quick units can strike from the side, like so. She used her hands to show a fast-moving attack. The classroom became loud with debate. Different species argued, each believing their way of fighting was the best. Kalar let them talk. He wanted to see their instincts. He watched the 2 humans. Jin was writing notes on a data pad. Mina was just watching, her head tilted slightly. They did not offer any opinions. Cadet Jin, Kalar said, his voice cutting through the noise. What is your analysis?
Jin looked up.
His eyes were calm. The phalanx requires unit cohesion and clear lines of sight. In a broken city, with tall buildings and rubble, those lines of sight disappear. It becomes vulnerable to attacks from above and from inside buildings. It was a correct answer. It was also the most basic, simple answer from the textbook. It held no personal insight, no fire. Thank you, Cadet, Kalar said, a hint of disappointment in his voice. He turned to Mina. Cadet Mina, do you agree? Is there nothing more to add? Mina nodded. I agree with Cadet Jin. The formation does not work well in that terrain. Kalar moved on. This was how it was for the first few weeks. The humans, Jin and Mina, were always present. They were always on time. Their written work was perfect. But in the classroom, they were ghosts. They were quiet. They were polite. They never boasted. They never challenged another cadet's idea, even when that idea was clearly foolish. The other cadets started to notice. They did not understand the humans. The galaxy knew stories about humans. They were supposed to be fierce and clever and unpredictable. They had expanded across their home sector with amazing speed. But these 2, they were so passive, so quiet. During a break, Borv the Grown walked over to their table. He was huge, towering over the sitting humans. You 2, he rumbled. Do you even have a voice? Do you just sit and watch while others do the real work? Jin looked up at him. There was no fear in his eyes. There was no anger either. It was like looking at a deep, still lake. We are here to learn, Jin said simply. Learn. Borv laughed. You learn by doing, by fighting, by showing your strength. He flexed a massive arm. Mina spoke, her voice soft but clear. There are many ways to learn. Borv just shook his head and walked away, muttering to his Gran friends about weak, quiet creatures. The practical simulations started. These were training exercises in a virtual reality arena. The cadets were put into teams and given missions. In the first simulation, the mission was to capture a flag from a defended position. Jin and Mina were on a team with Borv and a few Tisal. Borv immediately took charge. We will hit them straight on. A direct assault. The Gran will break their line and the Tisal can run in and grab the flag. The Tisal chattered nervously. It was a simple plan, a brute force plan. Jin looked at the terrain map. He pointed to a narrow canyon path on the side of the virtual battlefield. This path is narrow. It is not well defended. A small team could use it to flank the enemy position while the main attack distracts them. Borv looked at the path. Too slow. And it is a tight space. It is a trap. The strong do not take the back way. We attack from the front. Jin did not argue. He simply nodded. Understood. In the simulation, Borv's team charged. The frontal assault was a bloody mess. The enemy was well dug in. The ground took heavy fire. The T-cell tried to dart in but were cut down. The whole time Jin and Mina were at the back as Borv had ordered them to be. They provided covering fire. Their shots were accurate. They hit their targets. But they did not move from their spot. They did not try to change the plan. They did not try to be heroes. They lost the simulation. In the debriefing room, Borv was angry. They were too strong. Their defenses were better than we thought. Kalar watched the replay of the battle. He saw the Grand charge bravely. He saw the T-cell fall, and he saw the two humans sitting in a rearguard position, doing exactly as they were told. They had not made a single mistake. But they had also not done anything special. Cadet Jin, Kalar said, you identified a potential flanking route. Yet you did not push your commander to use it. Why? Jin stood up. The chain of command was clear. Cadet Borv was the team leader. He made a tactical decision. It is not the place of a soldier to question orders during a live engagement. It causes confusion, but you could have won, Kalar said, his scales shimmering with frustration. Perhaps, Jin said, or perhaps the flank was a trap as Cadet Borv suspected. We will never know. We followed the plan we were given. Kalar looked at Mina. She just nodded in agreement. This was the problem. This was the mystery. They were perfect soldiers, but they had no initiative. They had no fire. They were like very smart, very obedient machines. Later that day, the cadets were in the common room, relaxing. A Signian cadet was showing a complex puzzle game on a large screen. It was a game of logic and prediction. The Signians were good at it. The T-cell were not. The Gran had no patience for it. Jin and Mina were sitting nearby, drinking a warm brown liquid that humans seemed to like. The Signian cadet, named Zan, could not solve the final level. The variables are too numerous, Zan said, his voice a monotone. The solution path is not logical. Jin watched the screen for a minute, his eyes moving slowly. Then he stood up, walked over, and whispered something to Zan. Zan's large, glassy eyes blinked. He input a new sequence of commands. The puzzle on the screen lit up and solved itself. A cheerful sound played. The cadets in the room went quiet. They all looked at Jin. Zan turned to Jin. Your solution was not logical. It was based on predicting the creator's illogical patterns. How did you know? Jin just gave a small shrug. It seemed like the right way, he said, and went back to his seat with Mina. It was a small thing. But it was the first spark anyone had seen from the quiet humans. They were not stupid. They were not unskilled. They were just quiet. They kept everything inside. Instructor Kalar thought about this as he prepared the next day's lessons. He remembered the stories about humans. He remembered their reputation. He looked at the perfect bland files of Jin and Mina. He could not understand it. Why were they so passive in class? Where was the spirit that let their species conquer stars? He decided he needed to push them harder. He needed to find a way to break through their quiet shell and see if there was a real warrior inside, or if the galaxy's fears about humanity were just a story. He did not know that the answer was not hidden in their future, but in their past. A past recorded in battle logs he had not yet thought to check. The frustration in Instructor Kalar grew like a slow-burning fire. Weeks turned into a month at the Galactic Unified Military Academy. The other cadets were finding their voices. Borv the Gran was louder, his belief in pure strength even stronger. The Tassal were faster, their arguments more sharp. The Signians' plans were more complex. But the two humans, Jin and Mina, remained a quiet puzzle. They were like two deep, still pools of water. You could see the surface, but you had no idea what was underneath. Their silence in class was no longer just noticed. It was becoming an irritation. It felt like they were not even trying. Kalar decided to change his approach. He would force them to participate. He would put them in a situation where their quietness would not be an option. He designed a new simulation, It was not about capturing a flag or destroying a target. It was a survival scenario. The briefing took place in the main simulation chamber. The room was a large, empty circle, but with special projectors it could become any environment. "Cadets," Kalar said, his scales shifting to a more serious, darker green. "Today's exercise is simple. You will be dropped into a hostile jungle. The environment is dangerous. The native wildlife is aggressive. Another team playing the role of enemy hunters will be searching for you. Your goal is simple. Survive for 24 hours. There is no flag to capture. There is no base to defend. Your only victory condition is to not be killed by the environment or the hunters." A low murmur went through the class. This was different. This was about endurance and fear. "You will be in teams of 2, Kalar announced. He looked at his list. Team 1, Borv and Zan, the Gron and the Signian, a brute and a logician. Team 2, Chur and Teal, 2 Tisal, fast and clever. Team 3, Jin and Mina. Kalar watched the humans as he said their names. They showed no reaction. They just nodded slightly. Borv grinned, a wide smile that showed his thick teeth. He looked over at Jin and Mina. "I hope you two can run," he rumbled. "Or at least hide very, very quietly." The simulation began. The cadets were placed in different parts of the virtual jungle. The air was thick and humid. Strange, loud animal calls echoed from all directions. Borv and Zan started moving immediately. "We find high ground," Borv declared. "We see them before they see us." Zan the Signian was already scanning with a sensor device. That is a logical course of action. However, the density of the canopy will reduce sensor effectiveness by 70%. Meanwhile, the 2 Tisal, Chur, and Teal moved like ghosts through the undergrowth. They did not talk. They used hand signals. They found a small cave behind a waterfall and decided to hide there. It was a good, defensible spot. Kalar and the other cadets watched the progress of the teams on large screens in the observation room. Everyone's eyes were drawn to the screen showing Jin and Mina. The humans did not run. They did not look for a cave. The moment the simulation started, they simply melted into the jungle. They moved slowly and deliberately, choosing each step with care so as not to make a sound. They did not speak. They did not even use hand signals. It was as if they already knew what the other was thinking. They found a spot under the thick roots of a giant tree. It was not a cave. It was just a shadowy, damp space. They settled in, their backs against the rough bark. And then they did nothing. They did not move. They did not fidget. Their breathing slowed. On the biosign monitor, their heart rates dropped to a slow, steady rhythm. They became part of the jungle. An hour passed. Then 2. The hunter team, played by some of the more aggressive Gron and Tisal cadets, was active. They were searching, using sensors trying to find the hiding teams. Borv and Zan were found first. Borv's plan for high ground had taken them to a rocky hill. It gave them a good view, but it also made them easy to see. The hunter team surrounded them. There was a short, loud firefight. Borv fought bravely, but he was outnumbered. Zan was taken out by a single precise shot from a T-cell hunter hiding in the trees. Their screen in the observation room flashed red. Eliminated. Not long after, the hunters found the T-cell cave. They did not go in. Instead, they used a sonic device that made the cave unbearable to be in. Chur and Teal were forced to run out right into the hunters' waiting guns. Their screen flashed red. Eliminated. Only one team remained, Jin and Mina. The hunters now focused all their efforts on finding the 2 humans. They spread out. They used heat sensors. They used motion trackers. But the jungle was warm and the humans' body heat blended with the environment. They were so still that the motion trackers registered them as part of the background. The hunters passed within 10 meters of their hiding spot. Jin and Mina did not even blink. Their weapons were held ready, but they made no move to use them. They just watched, their eyes calm and patient. The 24 hours ended. A horn sounded in the simulation, signaling the end of the exercise. Jin and Mina had won. They had survived without firing a single shot. The jungle faded away, replaced by the gray walls of the simulation chamber. The other cadets were already there, looking annoyed or embarrassed. Jin and Mina stood up from their seated positions and walked calmly to the debriefing area. In the observation room, Kalar felt his frustration reach its peak. They had won, yes, but they had won by doing nothing, by hiding. It was the most passive victory he had ever seen. He marched down to the debriefing room. The cadets were all seated. Borv was scowling. The Tassal were chittering angrily about the sonic device. Kalar stood in front of the room. He looked directly at Jin and Mina. "That was the impressive display of patience," Kalar began, his voice tight. "You successfully avoided all contact. You survived." He paused, letting his words hang in the air. "But this is a military academy. We are training warriors, not survivors. What is the military value of hiding for a full day? What did you achieve? You did not gather intelligence on the enemy. You did not slow their advance. You simply existed." He leaned forward, his forearms clasped behind his back. "I asked you before about your passivity. You said you were learning. I see now what you are learning. You are learning how to disappear. Is that the human strategy? To be so quiet, so still that your enemies forget you are there?" A few cadets snickered. Borv laughed openly. Jin looked at Kalar. His face was, as always, calm. "Instructor, the objective was to survive. We survived. The objective was to survive as soldiers." Kalar's voice rose, a sharp click. "A soldier must sometimes act. A soldier must have a warrior's spirit. Where is your fire? Where is your will to fight?" For the first time, a flicker of something passed over Jin's face. It was not anger. It was something else. Something colder. It was gone in an instant. Mina spoke, her voice soft but clear in the silent room. "Instructor, is it not a soldier's first duty to complete the mission?" The mission was survival. We completed it. Engaging the enemy was not a requirement. It was an unnecessary risk. It was a requirement of honor, Borv shouted, unable to stay silent. "To face your enemy. To show your strength." Jin turned his head slowly to look at Borv. "Is it honorable to die when you do not need to?" he asked. His tone was genuinely curious, not challenging. Borv was speechless for a moment. "It is honorable to fight," he finally roared. Kalar saw that this was going nowhere. The humans were using logic to defend their passivity. He needed proof. He needed to see what they were really made of. He remembered their files. They were sealed, sent from the human military. He had never looked at them. He had assumed they were as bland as the cadets themselves. Now he was curious. "Enough," Kalar said, ending the debate. "Class is dismissed." As the cadets filed out, Borv shoved past Jin, muttering "cowards" under his breath. Jin did not react. He just kept walking. Kalar went straight to his office. He sat at his terminal and entered his command codes. He pulled up the records for Cadet Jin and Cadet Mina. Their basic files were there: name, planet of origin, test scores. But there was another section, marked with the symbol of the Terran Unified Command. It was labeled Sealed Military Record, Active Duty Logs. He had the authority to open them. He had never felt the need to before. Now he did. He clicked on Jin's file first. A warning message appeared. Classified, eyes only. He bypassed it. The file opened. The first thing he saw was a mission designation. Operation Silent Watch, Siege of Cerberus 9. Kalar had heard of Cerberus 9. It was a human colony world that had been attacked by the Zithian swarm. It was a brutal, bloody battle. The humans had won, but at a great cost. He opened the file and began to read. It was not just a report. It was a full data dump. It included video from Jin's own helmet camera. The screen showed a city in ruins. Smoke filled the sky. The sound of explosions and energy weapons was constant. And there, in the middle of the chaos, was Jin. He was younger, his face smudged with dirt, but his eyes were the same. Calm, watchful. The log showed his position, a bombed-out clock tower overlooking a main city square. The log entries were time-stamped. Day 1, 14 hour took position. Enemy armor moving in the square below. Day 1, 1930. No movement. Holding position. Day 2, 08 Sir, enemy patrol. Did not engage. Day 2, 16 hours, enemy command unit sighted. Out of range. Holding position. Kalar fast-forwarded the log. Jin did not move. For 2 full days the young man sat in that tower. He did not sleep. He barely moved. He drank water and ate nutrient paste, but his focus never wavered. His biosigns, recorded in the log, remained as steady and calm as they had been in the jungle simulation. Then, Kalar reached the entry for Day 3, 1147. Day 3, 1147. High-value target confirmed. Zithian Hive commander entering the square. The video showed a large, heavily armored vehicle moving into the square. It was surrounded by smaller troops. This was the brain of the local swarm forces. Killing it would cause chaos. Jin's breathing, audible on the audio log, remained even. There was no excitement, no fear. He shifted his rifle slightly. The crosshairs on the video settled on a small, vulnerable spot on the vehicle's armor. He waited. The vehicle stopped. A hatch opened. Jin fired one shot, a single high-powered round. The sound of the shot was loud and clean in the recording. On the video, the Zethian hive commander, just emerging from the hatch, collapsed. The vehicle went dead. The smaller troops began to scramble in confusion. The log entry was simple. 11:48, target eliminated. But it did not end there. The enemy soldiers, now leaderless, started to panic. They began firing wildly. Some ran. Others tried to find the shooter. Jin's log became a chilling. Listed 11:51, eliminated squad. Leader 11:53, eliminated communications. Officer 11:55, eliminated heavy weapons specialist, shot after shot. Each one precise. Each one killing a key enemy soldier. He was not just shooting. He was surgically dismantling the enemy force, creating maximum chaos and stopping them from reorganizing. He was like a gardener calmly pulling weeds. There was no rage, no joy. Just a quiet, terrifying efficiency. After 30 minutes, the square was empty of living enemies. The attack on that part of the city had completely broken down. Jin's final log entry for the day was 12:30, threat neutralized. Relocating to secondary position. Kalar leaned back in his chair. The quiet classroom. The passive cadet. The still silent form in the jungle simulation. It all clicked into place with a terrible clarity. The silence wasn't emptiness. It was focus. The patience wasn't passivity. It was the stillness of a predator waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Jin wasn't a coward. He was a sniper. His battlefield was not a place of loud charges and roaring. It was a place of quiet waiting and sudden absolute violence. Kalar sat in the dark of his office, the ghostly light of the battle log playing on his scaly face. He had been so wrong. He had asked where their fire was. He had just seen it. It was not a roaring blaze. It was the single concentrated flame of a blowtorch, hot enough to cut through steel. He slowly closed Jin's file. His hand, one of his four, trembled slightly. He now knew the truth about one of his quiet human cadets. With a feeling of deep dread and overwhelming curiosity, he moved his cursor and opened the file for Cadet Mina. The screen flickered to life, displaying Mina's file. The header was stark and simple: Cadet Mina, Pasan, Terran Stellar Navy. Below it was the mission that had sealed her record. Incident report, TSN Dauntless, the blackout of Kessel's Drift. Kalar knew of Kessel's Drift. It was not a planet, but a dense and dangerous asteroid field on the edge of disputed space. It was a place where navigation errors meant death. The story of the Dauntless was a minor legend. It was a ship that had somehow survived the impossible. He never knew a cadet in his class had been on board. He opened the main log. It was not just a report from a single soldier. It was the compiled data from the entire ship's bridge, with a special filter tracking Mina's station and her personal comms. The video opened on chaos. The bridge of the TSN Dauntless was dark, lit only by red emergency lights. Alarms blared, a constant screaming sound of danger. The main view screen showed a spinning star field and the jagged edges of tumbling asteroids. The ship was lurching out of control. A voice the captain's was shouting, "Report, I need power. Why are we dead in the water?" An engineering officer yelled back, his voice cracking with panic. "Direct hit to the main reactor, sir. It's a cascade failure. We've lost primary and secondary power. We're on batteries and they're draining fast." Kalar's eyes found Mina. She was at the tactical station, several ranks below the captain's chair. She was younger, her face pale but completely calm amidst the shouting. Her hands were flying over her console, her eyes fixed on her screens. "Sir," she said, her voice clear and steady, cutting through the panic. "We have 3 Marauder frigates on an intercept course. They are powering weapons." On the view screen, 3 small ugly ships appeared. They were pirates, scavengers who hunted disabled vessels. They moved like sharks moving in for the kill. The captain slammed his fist on his chair. "Helm, I need thrust." "Anything!" "The thrusters are dead, Captain," the helmsman cried. We have no control. We're drifting into the asteroid field. The ship shuddered as a small asteroid scraped against the hull. The sound was a deep grinding groan of metal. This was it. This was the end. A dead ship, pulled into a gravity well or smashed by rocks or torn apart by pirates. There was no way out. Kalar watched Mina. She was not looking at the pirates. She was not looking at the asteroids. She was studying a complex schematic of the Dauntless on her screen. Her fingers tapped rapidly, running simulations. "Captain," she said again, her voice still calm. "I have an idea." The captain turned to her, his face a mask of despair and anger. "An idea? Cadet, we have no power." "What idea could you possibly have?" "We have auxiliary power in Section 7 Beta," Mina said. "It's a backup for the mess hall lights and environmental systems. It's not connected to the engines or weapons. It's a trickle," the engineer scoffed. "It's nothing. It can't move this ship," Mina continued, her voice like a steady drumbeat. "It is not for moving us forward. I am rerouting it to the port side cold thrusters." The helmsman looked at her as if she were crazy. "The cold thrusters? They are for tiny course corrections when we are docked. They are useless. They are like a feather pushing a mountain." "Give her the power," the captain ordered, his voice tired. He had nothing left to lose. Kalar watched the data stream on the log. Mina's hands moved with impossible speed. She bypassed safety protocols. She rerouted power through burnt-out conduits, finding paths no one else knew existed. A small trickle of energy, barely a flicker, reached the port-side thrusters. On the external view, nothing seemed to happen. The huge cruiser continued its slow, helpless drift. The marauder ships closed in. They did not fire to destroy. They wanted to board, to loot. They moved to surround the Dauntless, one on each side and one above. 1 minute until they are in boarding range, a sensor officer reported, his voice shaking. Mina's eyes were locked on her screen. She was not piloting the ship. She was not aiming weapons. She was typing small, precise commands into the thruster control. A tiny puff of gas came from the portside thrusters. It was so small it was almost invisible. The massive ship tilted ever so slightly. The movement was slow, gradual. It was like watching a giant tree begin to fall. No one on the bridge felt it. The drift was too slow, but in the airless void of space the effect was certain. The Dauntless began to rotate. The captain noticed it first on the view screen. The starfield was turning. "What's happening? Are we caught in a gravity field?" "No, sir," the helmsman said, confused. "We're just turning." Kalar, watching the log with the benefit of hindsight, saw it. He saw Mina's genius. She was not trying to escape. She could not. She was using the one thing she had, a tiny, useless amount of power, to change the geometry of the battlefield. The Dauntless was rotating slowly, its nose turning towards the Marauder frigate on its starboard side. The Marauder captain, seeing the huge ship turning towards him, panicked. He thought the humans had regained control and were trying to ram him. He fired his ship's main engines to get out of the way. At the same time, the Marauder frigate above the Dauntless saw the ship below it moving erratically. It also fired its thrusters to adjust its position and maintain its boarding approach. They were not communicating. They were pirates, not a disciplined navy. Mina, watching all this on her sensors, typed another command. Another tiny puff from the port thrusters. The rotation of the Dauntless slowed, then stopped. It was now perfectly positioned. The two moving Marauder frigates, reacting to the Dauntless's subtle drift, did not see each other. The frigate that had been on the starboard side flew directly into the flight path of the frigate that had been above, on the bridge. The silence in the observation room was absolute. It was a heavy, thick silence, filled with the ghost of the explosion that had just played out on the main screen. The final moments of Mina's battle log hung in the air. The two Marauder frigates, moving to avoid the Dauntless's slow, helpless turn, had collided. The impact was not dramatic at first. It was a grinding of metal and a shower of sparks. But then a fuel line must have ruptured. A fire started deep inside one of the ships. It spread quickly, reaching a weapons magazine. The screen filled with a blinding white flash. When the light faded, both ships were gone, torn into a million pieces of glowing debris. The third Marauder frigate, seeing its two companions destroyed by what looked like a clever trap, immediately turned and fled at full speed. On the bridge of the Dauntless, there was no cheering. There was only a stunned, disbelieving silence. The crew looked at the empty space where their enemies had been. They looked at the view screen. now showing only stars and asteroids. They were still drifting, still powerless, but they were alive. The captain slowly turned his head. His eyes, wide with shock, found Mina. She was still at her station. Her hands were now still. She looked up, meeting his gaze. Her face was pale, but her expression was the same as it always was. Calm, quiet, and focused. "How?" the captain began, his voice a dry whisper. "How did you do that?" Mina blinked. "I used the cold thrusters, sir. I adjusted our rotation to create a traffic problem for them." The log ended. The screen went dark, returning to the file menu. Instructor Kalar sat in his chair. He felt cold. He had watched a young cadet, the same one who sat so quietly in his classroom, use a dead ship as a weapon. She had not fired a single shot. She had not even had the power to turn on a light. She had used the enemy's own fear and aggression against them. She had made them destroy themselves. He finally understood. The human's quietness was not a lack of something. It was a presence. It was the presence of a deep, cold, and terrifyingly patient intelligence. Jin's silence was the silence of a hunter who could wait for days. Mina's silence was the silence of a mind that could see the whole battlefield as a complex machine and find the one tiny lever to pull that would make the machine break itself. He stood up. His legs felt unsteady. He needed to see them. He needed to look at them again now that he knew the truth. He walked out of his office and through the quiet halls of the academy. It was late. Most cadets were in their quarters. He did not know where he was going until he found himself outside the main simulation chamber. The door was unlocked. He went inside. The large circular room was dark and empty, but as his eyes adjusted, he saw two figures sitting on the floor in the center. It was Jin and Mina. They were not talking. They were just sitting there in the dark and silence. It was like they were recharging. They heard him enter and turned their heads. They showed no surprise. Kalar walked towards them, his footsteps echoing in the vast room. He stopped a few meters away. He did not know what to say. "It was you," he finally said, his voice rough. "In the survival simulation. You weren't just hiding. You were waiting." Jin nodded slowly. "Yes, instructor. We were waiting for the hunters to make a mistake. To get frustrated. To separate. If one had come close enough alone, we would have taken him out. Quietly, then used his gear." Kalar turned to Mina. "And in the first simulation, with the flag. You saw a flanking route. You knew it was the key to winning." "Yes," Mina said. "We were waiting for the enemy to commit to Borv's attack. When they did, their command node would have been exposed for 45 seconds. We could have reached it, but you didn't say anything." Kalar's voice was not angry anymore. It was just confused. "You let your team lose, why?" Jin and Mina looked at each other. It was that same silent communication, a whole conversation in a glance. Jin looked back at Kalar. "Instructor, in a real battle with real soldiers, we would have spoken. We would have insisted. Or we would have taken the initiative. But here, it is a classroom. The consequences are not real. Our fellow cadets, they do not trust us. They do not listen. To argue in the middle of a simulation would have caused more confusion. It would have broken the team completely." Mina continued. "We have learned that sometimes the most efficient way is to let a small failure happen. It is a lesson that is learned better than one that is just told. We knew you and the others would see the data. We knew you would eventually ask the right questions." Kalar stared at them. They had not just been taking the simulation. They had been using it. They were teaching him a lesson. They were teaching the entire class a lesson without saying a single word. "You think of everything in terms of the final goal," Kalar whispered. "Not about pride. Not about honor in the moment. Only the mission. Is that not a soldier's duty?" Mina asked. Her voice was gentle, but the question felt like a hammer. Kalar thought about Borv, shouting about honor and strength. He thought about the Tassal, moving fast but without a greater plan. He thought about himself, judging these humans for their quietness. He had been so wrong. "You sit in my class," he said, "and you listen to cadets talk about tactics as if it is a game, and you say nothing. Because you have lived it. You have seen real war." Jin's face was serious. "It is not something we like to talk about, instructor. We sit quietly, because we are listening for the things that are not said. We are watching for the patterns. The classroom is just another kind of battlefield. The words are the weapons. The ideas are the strategies. We do not see a reason to waste them. Kalar nodded slowly. He finally understood. The humans were not the quietest students in the class. They were the most dangerous. Because they were the only ones who were truly, fully aware of where they were and what they were doing at all times. I saw your logs, Kalar said quietly. Both of them. There was a long pause. Jin and Mina showed no emotion. They simply accepted this. We thought you might, Jin said. Does it change anything? Mina asked. Kalar let out a long, slow breath. It changes everything, he said. And it changes nothing. You are still the same cadets, but now I see you for what you are. He turned and walked towards the door. He stopped and looked back at the two quiet figures in the dark. Tomorrow, he said, in class, there will be a new problem. I will be interested to see your analysis. Jin gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. We will be there, instructor. Kalar left the simulation chamber and walked back to his office. The academy felt different now. The walls, the lights, the very air felt charged with a new understanding. He had spent his life studying warriors. He thought he knew what strength looked like. He thought it was loud and fast and proud. He now knew that the most terrifying strength was quiet. It was the strength to wait, the strength to think, the strength to let your enemy defeat themselves. He sat at his desk and pulled up the lesson plan for the next day. He deleted the simple tactical exercise he had prepared. He needed something more complex, something that could not be solved by brute force or speed. He needed a problem that required patience, a problem that required a deep, quiet mind to see the solution that was hidden in plain sight. He started to design a new simulation, one with no clear enemy, one with a political conflict, a civilian population, and limited resources. A problem where firing a weapon would be the worst possible choice. He smiled for the first time that night. He was no longer frustrated. He was excited. He felt like he was about to see a masterpiece being painted, and he was the one providing the canvas. He looked at the clock. It was very late. But he knew that somewhere in the academy, two of his cadets were not sleeping. They were sitting quietly, thinking, preparing, waiting for the next day to come. The next morning, the classroom felt different. The air was tense and quiet. The other cadets had heard rumors. They did not know about the battle logs, but they knew something had changed. Instructor Kalar was different. He was not irritated. He was watchful, and his attention was focused on the two humans, Jin and Mina, who sat in their usual seats just as quiet as always. But now, no one thought their quietness was weakness. Borv did not grin at them. The T-cell did not chatter near them. The Signians watched them with a new analytical curiosity. The silence of the humans was no longer empty. It was full of meaning. It was a silence that had weight. Cadets, Kalar began, his voice calm and clear. Today's problem is not about combat. It is about consequence. A holographic map glowed to life in the center of the room. It showed a small green planet. This is the colony world of Viridia. It is home to two native species. The first are the Cathar. The image showed a tall, graceful species with long necks. They are peaceful farmers. They live in the wide, open plains. The map highlighted the plains in green. The second are the Vorin. The image changed to show a shorter, stockier species with thick fur. They are miners and builders. They live in the mountain ranges. The mountains on the map lit up in brown. A valuable mineral has been discovered, Kalar continued. It is found only in a narrow valley that lies exactly on the border between the plains and the mountains. Both the Cathar and the Vorin claim the valley. Tensions are high. A single spark could start a war. He looked around the room. You are a Galactic Union peacekeeping force. Your mission is to prevent a war and find a stable solution. You have one company of soldiers. That is all. You cannot take the mineral for yourselves. You cannot wipe out one of the species. You must find a way for them to share the planet. You have 1 hour to prepare your strategy. Begin. The classroom erupted into noise. Cadets formed into groups, arguing and debating. Borv immediately gathered the other Grun and some T-Sal. It is simple, he declared. We put our soldiers in the valley. We show our strength. We tell them that if they fight, they will have to fight us first. They will be too scared to start a war. A T-Sal cadet chirped in. But that does not solve the problem. It just delays it. What happens when we leave? We will never leave, Borv said. We will show them we are strong forever. The Signians, led by Zan, had a different plan. They created a complex schedule for mining the mineral. We will divide the valley into a grid, Zan explained. The Cathar can mine on even-numbered days. The Vorin can mine on odd-numbered days. It is perfectly fair and logical. But the Vorin are stronger miners, another Signian pointed out. They will extract more on their days. The Cathar will be unhappy. Then we will adjust the schedule to account for extraction rates, Zan said, already typing furiously on his datapad. The room was full of loud, complicated plans. Plans of force, plans of control, plans of complicated rules. Kalar watched Jin and Mina. They were not talking to anyone. They were not in a group. They sat together looking at the map. They were not arguing. They were not writing a long report. They were just looking. They studied the images of the Cathar and the Vorin. They looked at the maps of the plains and the mountains. They read about what the Cathar grew and what the Vorin built. They were so quiet it was easy to forget they were there. After 50 minutes, Kalar called for silence. Time is up. Who will present their strategy first? Borv went first. He stood up and thumped his chest. We will show them the power of the Galactic Union. We will be the wall that stands between them. They will learn to fear us more than they hate each other. Kalar nodded, his face neutral. A strategy of intimidation. Next, Zan the Signian presented his complex mining schedule. He showed charts and graphs. He explained the mathematical formulas for fairness. It is the most logical solution, he concluded. Kalar nodded again. A strategy of control through regulation. Next, other cadets presented their ideas. Some suggested tricking one species. Some suggested giving the valley to one species and giving the other species something else. All the plans were about using the peacekeeping force to enforce a solution from the outside. All the plans were loud, complicated, and full of potential problems. Finally, Kalar looked at the back of the room. Cadet Jin, Cadet Mina, do you have a strategy? All eyes turned to them. The room was silent. Jin and Mina stood up. Jin spoke. His voice was calm and soft, but in the quiet room everyone could hear him. We would move our company of soldiers out of the valley, Jin said. A murmur of confusion went through the class. Borv snorted. So you would just run away? You would let them fight? No, Mina said. We would move them to the Cathar farmlands. Now the class was completely confused. Jin continued. The Cathar are farmers. Their most valuable resource is not the mineral. It is their land. But their soil is poor. It is difficult to grow food. They want the mineral to trade for better farming equipment and fertilizers. He paused, letting the cadets think about that. Mina took over. The Vorin are miners. Their most valuable resource is not the mineral either. It is their technology for building strong structures in the mountains. But their tunnels are unstable. They have many cave-ins. They want the mineral to make stronger supports for their mines and homes. They looked at each other, and Jin finished their plan. We would take our soldiers and help the Cathar dig a series of irrigation canals from the mountains to the plains. The mountains have melting snow and fresh water. The plains need water. Our soldiers have engineering tools and strength. We can do it quickly, Mina added. At the same time, we would offer the Vorin our engineers and heavy lift equipment to help them reinforce their mine tunnels and build safer homes. We would show them how to use some of the mineral they already have to make stronger metal alloys. Jin looked around the room, his eyes resting on Kalar. We would not guard the mineral. We would make the mineral less important. We would give the Cathar the water they need to make their farms rich. We would give the Vorin the safety they need in their homes. Then the valley with the mineral becomes just a piece of land. It is not their only hope for a better life. They would have less reason to fight over it. They might even decide to mine it together because they have already learned to work with us and through us with each other. The classroom was utterly silent. No one had thought of this. No one had thought to look at what the people actually needed. Everyone had been focused on the thing they were fighting over. The humans had looked past the problem to find the cause of the problem. They did not use force. They did not use complicated rules. They used understanding. They used help. Kalar felt a shiver go down his spine. This was it. This was the difference. The other cadets saw a battlefield to be controlled. The humans saw a community to be healed. They saw the connections that others missed. Borv was the first to break the silence. But that is not a military solution. That is farming and building. Jin looked at him. Is the mission to win a war or to prevent one? The best battle is the one you never have to fight. Mina nodded. A soldier's job is to protect life. Sometimes the way to protect life is to help it grow, not to stand in front of it with a weapon. Kalar did not need to say anything. The answer was clear on the faces of the other cadets. They were not laughing. They were not scoffing. They were thinking. They were learning. He looked at the two quiet humans. He saw them not as strange, passive creatures, but as what they were, two of the most dangerous and effective soldiers he had ever met. Their weapon was not a gun or a spaceship. Their weapon was their mind. Their strategy was to solve the root of the problem, not just fight the symptom. Class dismissed, Kalar said softly. The cadets filed out slowly, talking in low, thoughtful voices. Borv walked past Jin and Mina. He did not look at them with anger or pride anymore. He looked at them with a new grudging respect. He gave a small, almost invisible nod before he walked away. Jin and Mina gathered their things. As they walked towards the door, Kalar stopped them. Your solution? It was the only one that would have worked in the long term, he said. Thank you, instructor, Mina said. We believe a warrior should be a builder when possible, Jin added. It is a stronger kind of victory. They left the classroom, two quiet figures in a noisy galaxy. Kalar knew that the galaxy was full of loud warriors and mighty fleets, but he also knew, with a certainty that he would carry for the rest of his life, that the most powerful force might just be the quietest. It was the force of patience, of understanding, and of a simple, powerful will to not just win, but to make things better. And from that day on, no one in Instructor Kalar's class ever again mistook human silence for weakness.